Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar hosted by Caring.com. Now, in the United States today, less than half of businesses are owned by women. Inc. reports it at about 42%. However, that statistic is poised to change. In the past 2 decades, women have launched twice as many businesses as their male counterparts. And you can see how that would be the case, especially in an industry like senior living and senior care, where what have typically been seen as female nurturing traits play off as huge strengths when leading organizations that center around care. And we've had thousands of professionals in the industry join our Caring webinars. And the mix of female professionals, we estimate to be over 70% of those who register. And we see many of these women in leadership positions, including many of you here on this webinar right now, who are founders, owners, CEOs, and executive directors. And while this statistic for overall number of female business owners is growing, these businesses are unfortunately not at parity. The annual earnings of women-owned businesses lag behind the national average. Only 3% of all women business owners ever make revenues of $1 million or more, which is why we are so excited to be joined by Julia Pimsleur today, whose passion is for helping female business owners scale their businesses to meet and exceed that $1 million mark. And she'll be walking us through some frameworks today that you can apply to help scale your businesses. Now, as we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. First, this is a one-way webcast, meaning only the presenters will have video and audio throughout today's presentation. However, we'd still love to hear from you. In just a little bit, we will be launching a poll question, so please participate in that. And at any point throughout the webinar, please submit your questions using the Q&A section within Zoom. We also have the chat open as well as if you'd like to engage with us presenters. One of the questions that we receive every webinar is, will this be recorded? And the answer is yes. We are recording today's webinar, and we plan to send out both the recording as well as the slides in the next couple of days. Now, this free webinar is brought to you by Caring.com. And for any of you joining who may be less familiar, Caring has a portfolio of websites and referral services that millions of people use to research senior living and senior care. Our mission is to help as many seniors as possible through empathetic expert guidance. And thousands of senior living communities and home care agencies partner with Caring to reach their target audience who are actively looking online for care solutions. Now, one of the many reasons that care seekers turn to Caring is for our high integrity reviews program, where we have over 375,000 consumer reviews. Now, my name is Olivia Duke. I'm the B2B Marketing Director here at Caring, and I will be serving as the moderator for today's presentation. I'm very pleased to introduce our expert presenter for today, Julia Pimsleur. Julia is an entrepreneur herself. She founded, scaled, and sold Little Pim, a language learning platform for young children. Drawing on her own experiences as an entrepreneur and CEO, she wrote the award-winning book, $1 Million Women, and created the network in order to help female entrepreneurs take their businesses to the next level. As the CEO of $1 Million Women, Julia now serves as a scaling coach and sales trainer. She has presented for several prestigious venues, including TEDx, Yale School of Management, and Harvard University, which is why we are incredibly excited to have her joining Caring webinars to speak on the psychology of sales today. I will now hand it over to Julia to tell you a little bit more about $1 Million Women. Hi, Julia.
Thank you so much. Hi, Olivia. I'm so delighted to be here with you and everyone who's joined the webinar. Thank you for taking some time to be with us here, and Olivia, for all you've done to set us up for success today. I'll just share a little bit about $1 Million Women before we get started, and then we're going to have this psychology of sales training. And if you're wondering, what if I've never done any sales training, or what if I've done some, is this relevant for me? This is going to be relevant for everybody here, because these are concepts that you can use whether you're just getting started or you've done 5 different sales training programs and came to see what my method is all about. So a little bit about us. We are an organization set up to help 1 million women get to 1 million in revenues. We want to change those stats that Olivia mentioned earlier, where only 2% of women are getting to 1 million in revenues. It's really time for that to be ancient history. And we know that's going to require women to have much easier and more affordable access to coaching, mentorship, business training, all the things that help women get to 1 million. And if you are running a senior care center, of course, you are an entrepreneur. You have to find your customers, keep your customers, hire teams, manage your cash flow. It's the same issues across all small and medium-sized businesses. And we do actually already have some women in our $1 Million Women network and community who are running senior centers. And I'm very excited to get to know all of you today. As you can see from the slide, we are in the US and Canada right now with plans to expand globally. And we have several hundred women in our online community called the Network powered by $1 Million Women. You can find that just at millionwomen.com. And I know Olivia is going to send out an email after with all the information. And in that network, women are growing their businesses in great company with other ambitious women, just like you, who want to scale up and getting access to the very business training, coaching, and mentorship that can help them do that. So a big part of scaling is being able to sell. There is no scale without sale. And that is why we're doing this sales training. I didn't set out to be a sales trainer. I just happened into this because so many women said, I want to make more money, Julia. And then when I said, well, great, have you had sales training? The answer was pretty much always no. So here's what we're going to cover today. Why is sales even so important? Just touching on that. We're going to teach you the 5 psychological tips that will make the biggest difference in your sales. Again, whether you've had no sales training or you've gone through multiple sales training programs. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my proprietary method, the Sales Cure, and then we'll do a live Q&A. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Olivia will be sure to bring them to my attention, and she may even pop in here and there and ask me a question. Olivia, before we get started, just quick reminder for me, it's 12:10. How long do we have here together?
We have really, we'll be able to cover the content and then no end time when it comes to questions. So as many as you're willing to take, if that works for you.
Great. And I love doing live coaching. I do a lot of live coaching in our community, the network, and in our business program, the $1 Million Women Accelerator. So feel free to bring any question. Nothing's too big or too small. And let's get going. So first of all, why sales? I touched on it earlier, but there is no scale without sale. This is one of the most important things to master if you run a business in any industry, because certainly when you're on your way to 1 million, and I'm going to assume that most of you are not yet at the $1 million mark, mainly because statistically so few businesses get there. That's why we created $1 Million Women. If you want to get to the $1 million mark, likely you are going to be the chief salesperson. At least up until 500,000 or so is what we've seen. Then women do sometimes start bringing in at least a little bit of help with sales. Sometimes they do bring on a sales team or a sales director. So you getting good at sales is the best thing you can do for your business. And even when it is time to bring on a sales team, you're going to have to manage and train them and hold them accountable. So all these things you're learning are going to help you make your sales, but then also be able to outsource and delegate some of it at some point and know what to look for and what to measure. So this is a good time to take our poll. Thank you for putting that up there, Olivia. We would love to know, have you already had some sales training? This will help me to also address the issues that you might have if you've already been trained. So just yes or no. And the next question, do we have a couple questions or just, is that the only one we're asking, Olivia?
Just this question today, but it looks like results of the participants, it's sitting at about 50-50, but it looks like we're skewing a little bit more. We have some formal sales training, but then some folks who haven't.
Oh, super. All right. So you guys are in the small elite of women who actually have had sales training. I'm thrilled to hear that. So I hope you'll have some tougher questions for me. And if you haven't, that's fine. This will all be relevant for you as well. I'll just share a couple of the training programs that I've gone through, and maybe some of you have gone through the same. I've done NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. That is a rapid change psychology method that is used very often in sales. Definitely worth looking into if you're looking to improve your sales. Sandler training, I did the Rest Ruffino. I've read lots and lots of sales books that I've then taught in our community, including Hyper Sales Growth, the only sales guide you ever need. This is a great one, $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. And my most recent favorite is the one by Chris Voss, who was the lead negotiator for the FBI for over 20 years. And it's called Never Split the Difference. That has a lot of great information about pricing and how to get through tough pricing conversations. So these are just some resources. Feel free to take screenshots of anything that I share with you here today. And I'm going to get started. So I'm just teaching you these 5 key things that will make a difference in your sales. And the very first one is, if you want to be better at sales, to shift from thinking about sales as selling, like doing something to someone, trying to convince them, how do I get them to say yes? That whole attitude is what's now considered the old way of selling. The new way of selling, which is what I was trained in, and I train everyone I work within, is really about serving. And if you can actually trade out your language, like not even think of it as selling, and at least for a little while, just think of like, okay, how can I best serve this person? And when you're getting on every call or going into every meeting, how can I serve this person at the highest level? You'll feel such a tremendous shift in how you approach every single sales call. And if you've done sales training already, my 50% here who've done your sales training, I really hope this was part of your training, because this is the foundation really of getting good at sales, is understanding that we're not here to get someone to do something. That's the old model. I'm sure we all have an image in our head of like the slick car salesman, or even reaching back further, kind of like the vacuum sales cleaner who used to show up at people's doors and like put his foot in the door, right? And if you could just get your foot in the door and talk and be charming, maybe you could get the door all the way open and get in and try to sell this vacuum cleaner. That's the old way of selling. The new way of selling is something you do with someone, not to someone. It's a conversation. It's an uncovering of their problems. It's a trying to serve them at a high level and find out through this one call or meeting, do they have a problem I can solve? Is this a problem that they're really committed to solving? Is now the time to solve that problem? And if so, then you have all the tools in your toolkit, if you're trained in sales, to actually help them overcome any objections they have and make the sale. But the very best thing you can do, and I did start with this as number 1 on purpose, is to trade out how you think about sales, trade selling for serving. The next thing I'm going to teach you is that while we think people buy because they want to get access to things they want, that is a piece of why people buy. But the bigger piece of why they buy is to prevent loss. This is an official psychological term. You can go Google it, called, not right now, called loss aversion. And the reason it's counterintuitive is that when we're selling, we want to make sure people understand that they're going to move away from pain, not just towards pleasure. And we're all usually guilty of focusing mainly on the benefits that we offer in our products and services. So for instance, if you're getting on a call with someone who says, well, I'll take myself. My mother is 86. At some point, we're going to be looking for a senior living facility for her. Thank goodness we're not there yet. But when we do, I will get on a phone call. And if someone starts saying like, oh, well, our senior living facility has a pool, and we also have a trainer who comes in twice a week and works with people who are still able to go to the gym. And we also have card games every night, and just starts throwing all these benefits at me. That's coming out of the idea that I'm going to buy to move towards pleasure. And that may work some of the time. But what works all of the time in sales is if you get good at helping people to understand what is the pain they are going to avoid by buying with you. So what would be a way more effective technique would be to ask the person a lot of questions about what their fears are. And perhaps some of you are already doing this. I'm excited to hear in the live Q&A what you're already doing and where you might need some help. But we do a lot of role play in my sales programs. And when you get good at saying things like, well, tell us, what's your biggest fear about what's going to happen when your mother goes into a senior living facility? So I might say something like, well, what if the nurses aren't nice? Or what if she is bored? My mother lives in New York City and she runs around going to movies and, galleries all the time. Like, are you going to have cultural activities? Will there be outings? So my pain that I want to make sure I'm not going to have is my mother going to be bored? Is she going to be cared for by people who are genuinely, loving and caring? I'll just take those two examples. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has those thoughts. So you would want to uncover that on the sales call and make sure that I realize that that pain isn't going to happen. And again, that's loss aversion. It has been proven that people are twice as likely to take action to move away from loss as they are to take action to move towards pleasure. Very counterintuitive. So I'll let you chew on that one and we can see if that comes up in the Q&A. All right, we're going to keep going. So the third big psychological principle to master, if you want to be good at sales, is future pacing. This comes straight out of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which again is a rapid change psychology method. I like to think of it a little bit as like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, on steroids. It's just a very quick way of getting people to make big changes. And in future pacing, you're taking them by the hand psychologically, not literally. A lot of these calls are now on Zoom or on the phone. It's great if you can be in the room with someone, but we know a lot of times that's not possible. And you're walking them through what's life going to look like once they're working with you. What's possible if they do sign up with you, if they do trust you to take care of their parents or their parent in your facility. So you might say something like, well, Jane, I hear that you're not quite sure if your dad is ready to go into the facility, but help me understand, like 6 months from now, if you were in a facility and if your entire family were overjoyed with how it was working out, what would that look like? And then you help them imagine what life will look like if they do buy from you. People tend to be terrible at imagining even 3 months, 6 months down the line. So one of the best things you can do in sales is get good at walking people through this future pacing. Now, you want to look at what's possible and what's wonderful, but as we just learned in the tip number 2 about loss aversion, you also want to make sure they understand that there is a lurking pain that they want to avoid. And of course, the pain here is twofold. It's either one, they don't choose you and they, then regret, oh my goodness, we should have moved my dad into a facility. Now he's really gone downhill. I wish we'd moved him in, 6 months ago. Or the second pain would be they choose a competitor. So that's where you want to get very good at, before we go to 4, you want to get very good at talking about what will happen if they don't, right? What will happen if they do and what will happen if they don't? Those are both future pacing. All right, moving on to the 4th psychological tip. So when you talk about pricing, you will hear people do a few things. They will panic. They will start to say, why now is not a good time. They will sometimes even kind of feel queasy. And all of this has a name in psychology. It's called the amygdala hijack. And the amygdala is a small group of neurons at the back of the brain. And it's what regulates fight, flight, or freeze. So I'm here in New York City, and if you're walking across the crosswalk and all of a sudden this taxi comes out of nowhere and is speeding at you, you're going to suddenly find this Herculean energy to sprint across the street and get out of the way of that taxi. But the problem is that kicks into gear when we're worried about making a big life decision, spending a ton of money, saying yes to doing something that's scary. You might have had this feeling yourself when you joined a big program that you were worried, is this going to work for me? Or even, went back to grad school. Any of these big decisions can kick the amygdala into high gear, and it starts flooding your body with cortisol, which is this, fear hormone, if you've studied psychology or biology a little bit. So when you're on the call with your client and you say something like, all right, wonderful. Well, would you like me to get into the pricing? And they say, yeah, sure. And then you say, well, it's $20,000 just to get set up. And that covers, your first month. And then after that, it's $18,000 per month. And even though you've been having this incredible conversation and they seem so excited, now suddenly they're like, okay, well, thanks. You know what? I need to think about this. Let me talk to my sister and I will get back to you. And suddenly you're like off the call. I would be curious, we're going to pause and put in the chat if you feel like you've ever experienced in one of your clients an amygdala hijack, or have you ever had one? And while the chat kicks in, because that can take a minute, I have them all the time. I remember when I first had to pay the bill from my sons to go to camp, and it was like $8,000 for a summer camp. And it was like, really, am I going to spend this kind of money? And I remember feeling kind of like queasy and like, do I really have to do this? Panicky almost. Now I'm thrilled I did it. It was worth it. But we all have probably experienced this ourselves. Has anyone experienced the amygdala hijack, Olivia? What are you seeing in the chat?
Let's see. I know from speaking, with many of you personally, that absolutely there's sticker shock in this industry. We hear it also a lot on the home care side. I have a resounding yes in the chat. They have experienced it. But I know it also happens on the home care side of people understanding what the rate would be to have someone come into their home to provide care as well. But on both
Good
sides,
point.
there is that sticker shock and that initial, let me talk to my spouse, let me talk to my parents, and probably avoiding that conversation if they can.
Yes. And the truth is, once you know it's happening and you realize like, oh, this is just an amygdala hijack. I mean, I have thousands of phone calls with women business owners who are interested in signing up for one of our programs at $1 Million Women. I can't tell you how often this happens, probably about 40 to 50% of the time. And before I understood what this was and got sales training, I used to take it personally. I would be like, oh, but you called because you want help. And now I've told you what the help costs. And, suddenly you need to go, you're panicking. Let me ask my husband. Like, you hear all kinds of things. But once you realize this is just a psychological impulsive reaction that they really have no control over, it's chemical, then you don't take it personally. And then with a little sales training, you can also learn what to do in those moments and kind of channel your coaching to coach them through this moment. Because look, you and I both know that the best thing they could do is say yes to you, because the alternative is they get off the call and now they still have this problem. Where am I going to put my dad? What am I going to do when my mom is ready for a senior home? It's way better that they say yes to you and get the process started and go to sleep that night knowing, okay, you know what? This is handled. Because otherwise they're just back out there talking to your competitors still with this problem. But it does require a lot of sales training and role play to get comfortable with this part. People can really get stuck here. All right, super. We're going to keep going. So the fifth and last psychological concept to master if you are selling is to help people understand that it's going to cost them more to keep the problem than to solve the problem. And that has a name too. It's called status quo bias. And it has been shown that people are way more likely to stick with what they have than to try something new. There's a lot of expressions around this, right? Like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. Or we've also seen so many incumbent presidents get reelected only because they're the incumbent, right? And that's become an expression like, oh, they're the incumbent. We're not even necessarily talking about a president when we use that term. So understanding that your client is more committed to keeping things the same than to actually finding the solution is also critical to you closing the deal. Because another set of sales tools it's important to master is, what do you do when you get to that end of the call and suddenly, you've explained the products and services, you've explained the options, they've maybe had their amygdala hijack, right? And now it's the make it or break it moment. Are they going to say yes, or at least set up a second call, or say they're going to, come visit or something? Or have you lost this sale and now just lost an hour of your time or however long you've been on the phone with them? This is where understanding status quo bias is a game changer, because there are certain questions you can ask, and we can do some role play about this together if you're interested, around how do you help the person understand that it's going to be worse for them to keep the problem than to solve the problem. So that's a critical skill to master. All right, we're going to do a quick recap because I've thrown a lot at you. So the first most important psychological principle is to think of it as serving, not selling. Don't get those backwards. Then to know that people buy to move away from pain much more than they do to move towards pleasure. So don't focus so much on all those benefits. Understand what their fears are and help them realize that the worst won't happen if they work with you, and there are a lot of benefits if they do. Get really good at future pacing, helping them to imagine what will life be like if they decide to go with you. What are all those great benefits that their parent or loved one is going to experience? And also, what's going to happen if they don't, right? Let's look into the future. When it's time to say the price, and for them to commit to this large amount of money, they will very likely have an amygdala hijack. In my business, it's about 50% of the time. I'd be curious how much it is in yours. The rule is the higher the price, the more likelihood the amygdala hijack. So keep that in mind. And then what do you do in those moments? How do you make sure you don't take it personally? How do you make sure you have tools at the ready so that you can recognize, oh, this is an amygdala hijack. Okay, I know what to do here, and not get sucked into their panic and fear and queasiness and lose the deal. And last but not least, helping them to understand that it's going to cost them more to keep the problem than to pay you to solve the problem. That one is critical in closing. So if you're interested in continuing to learn about sales, maybe you haven't had sales training, or even if you had and some of this is new to you, my method, I'm just going to take a moment to explain it, is called the Sales Cure. Cure is an acronym for Connect, Uncover, Recognize, Explain. Every single call or meeting has this structure, or should. I took this from all the sales trainings I did and just distilled it all down, because once I had taken 3 or 4 sales trainings, I realized, well, they're all teaching the same stuff, but it takes too many hours and it costs too many thousands of dollars to take all these sales trainings for my women to benefit. So I created this at first just for the women who I was coaching, and now I've made it available to the public through a DIY course called Sales Cure, which you'll get some information about in a follow-up email. And if you follow this order on every single sales call and every single meeting, 1, you will double your chance of success. And 2, you'll feel so much more confident going into your sales calls and meetings because you'll have a roadmap. And then you can teach it to your team. You can all have shared vocabulary. I just got off a sales training last week with a team who had gone through the Sales Cure. 2 people had gone through the Sales Cure, but not everyone on the team. So we hopped on a call, I trained the entire team, and now they just feel so much more in sync, and they actually closed a big deal 2 days later, partly because they had this method, they were in sync, they all knew exactly what was going to happen on the calls, and I'm sure that's just the beginning of how they're going to be able to use that to close a lot more sales. So what do you do now? You've learned a little bit of, the psychology behind sales. Maybe this dovetails with some things you've already learned. These are my recommendations. Study objections. This is where most sales fall apart. So do some reading around how do you get over objections. If you haven't already, write up the objections that you get the most often and practice overcoming those. Do a lot of role play. It could even be with an assistant or an intern. I don't care who you do it with, but don't get on sales calls without having role played. What are you going to do when they have the amygdala hijack and when they have these objections, many of which are around pricing? I'm sure you've experienced those before. Focus on the closing too, because my program, the Sales Cure, has an entire unit. It's a third of the program is on just closing. I always like to say it's all fun and games until the close. Because truly getting on calls with potential customers, it can be really fun. You get to know them, you talk about what they need, you talk about your products and services. So it's kind of all fun and games until you get to the part where it's like, okay, this is what this costs, right? And then you have to have the skills and the really the tools at your disposal to help them get over whatever objections they have and get to that yes. I have a lot of free tips on YouTube. So if some of this is resonating with you and you'd like to continue learning with me, you can, of course, sign up for one of our programs, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But you also can get a lot of free tips through my YouTube channel, which is just Julia Pimsleur Coach, where I unpack a few more of the psychological tips that I taught you here and teach a few of my other best practices. So that's a great place to just get a little more content if you're getting your feet wet in this whole sales cycle. So we are launching a program on October 4th that is specifically for teams. If you're hearing all this thinking, I know a lot of this, but I'm not sure my team does, or if you're also wanting everybody on your team to be in lockstep like that team I was coaching, we are offering this 50K in 21 days challenge. That's what we like to call it. We didn't write that on the slide, but that's our shorthand for what this program is. So we teach you how to make another $50,000 within 21 days. It's 4 live sessions with me, and you get access to our sales training program, the Sales Cure that I was talking about before. That's lifetime access. So of course you could just do it on your own, the Sales Cure, but we found that if you do it with me and have the role play and get to know the other members and a chance to ask your questions and get that help, people are way more successful with integrating the method and starting to make those first sales right away. And we've had people who learn this method and go close a $60,000 deal right after learning it, because it's not complex, just as these 5 things I taught you today were not super complex. So if you're interested in that, we do have a link either to just sign up or to set up a call with us and learn more. And I think Olivia is going to share those. But I want to get to the Q&A. If in Q&A you have questions about our upcoming program, again, it starts October 4th, 4 live sessions with me and lifetime access to the Sales Cure. Happy to answer those, and would love to do a little role play around things that you're facing in your sales cycles. So Olivia, let's open it up.
Wonderful. As we mentioned, please submit any questions that you have using the Q&A within Zoom. And I just pushed that link into chat. So if anybody is curious about the 50K in 21 days program, you can access that there. All right. So questions we have coming in now. One question we always get is, will this webinar be recorded? And the answer is yes. We will have that link to the recording that we will email out. So please feel free to share with colleagues that you think would benefit. And then another question we have. All right. So this comes down to discussing price. So this person asked, we have people who call and they just want to know our rates because they're price shopping different agencies. So how do you handle those calls when they want to jump right into price before any other sort of conversation?
Yes, well, that is certainly to their benefit, but it's not to your benefit to just give out the pricing right away. Usually those are not your best customers because they're just comparing on price, and you might not even want those customers, right? Like we always say about our coaching, like we're not the cheap and cheerful offering. And if you're looking for cheap and cheerful, there are a lot of people who do that. So unless you are cheap and cheerful, which if that's the case, then go ahead and put the pricing on the website and just tell anybody anything they want. But if you think that your proposition is something that you want time to explain and you believe that if they do understand it, they will choose you, then you simply say, we don't work that way. You say, we'd be happy to set up a call. It's a 30-minute call where we'll go over all the different aspects of how we work with our seniors and what makes us unique, answer any questions you have, and of course, we'll get to the pricing as well. Now, why do you do that? First of all, that way you have a chance to ask them what their pain points are, because maybe if you were to tell them the things that you think they want to hear, you might be missing what their biggest pain point is, right? Like I was talking about how my mother's very interested in cultural events, so I would never consider a home that had no cultural programming. But what if someone just was willing to just tell me everything without asking me any questions? They'd probably be focusing on things that she doesn't even care about. So that would be my suggestion. It's just because they're asking for the pricing doesn't mean you need to give it to them.
Well, in your answer, you actually touched on something that I know is debated often in our industry, and that is putting the pricing on the website. So there's a lot that goes into pricing, the level of care someone needs, what kind of services they would need. So that creates a lot of hesitance to putting, even if it's starting at pricing on the website. From your experience, what would be your recommendation on the website, off the website?
I think at the higher price points, it's better to not have the price on the website because you want to get to know your customer and see what their actual needs are before you get into the price. I mean, price is very relative. That's one thing you learn in sales training is price and value are 2 different things. And if there's very, very high value, then the price starts to look lower, right? Like if I'm shopping for my mom and they say to me, okay, well, here's one where she's going to be in a room, with 6 people. I'm making this up, right? But it's super cheap. Well, that value is very low. But if suddenly they're like, oh, she's going to have this beautiful room looking out over Central Park. And, we have a 4-star chef who cooks here in the facility, like that value is going up and up. And sometimes the way it's taught, it's almost like with your hands, right? Like if the price and the value are here, and then you start adding all this value, well, suddenly the price doesn't look so big anymore, right? So a lot of it is about showing that value before you give the pricing, because otherwise they're really just, again, doing this price comparison. And it's always a race to the bottom, the price comparison, right? Because the middle or lower ones always win. And yet that person might be super unhappy with that choice later because they don't have the value that they were looking for.
So the digital marketer is in me is thinking, ooh, how does your website showcase that value so that, you know, the scale does tip in your favor too? Could be another way to look at
But
that.
it's very hard to do without the phone call. I mean, as a coach, I was taught if you're charging anything over $2,000, you're going to have to get on a phone call unless you have, you know, a big recognized brand name, right? If you're Tony Robbins, maybe people are going to just get out their credit card and sign up for something that's $5,000 without talking to anyone. But I'm pretty sure everybody on this call is doing sales where the price is pretty high. So it's really just about getting them to be on that call.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so much to unpack. And I think with this group, definitely the connect and uncover is probably hitting home with how do you have that conversation. So another question we have is how do you keep the conversation going when someone does say it's too expensive? Or I guess the other example we used was, you know, oh, let me talk to my family member about it.
Right. So they're having this amygdala hijack. They're starting to talk about pricing and be very anxious about it. I think that's where future pacing comes into play. One thing we teach in our program is just because they're panicking about pricing doesn't mean you have to get sucked into that. If there are any moms on the call, I have, you know, two boys, and Olivia, I know you're a mom too. If your child is like banging on pots, right? Like they think that's fun. They're 2 years old. They're banging on pots. You're trying to be on a work phone call. It's too loud. You know, you don't go over there and yell at them and say, don't ever bang on a pot again. You might come over and say, oh, look, you know, here's a crayon and some paper. Why don't you draw me a flower? Draw me the best flower you can possibly draw. Right. So what's that called, Olivia? Like, what do you call that when you do that with your child?
Distracting. I definitely do that. How do you, redirect?
That's exactly it. Redirect them. And so that is a very powerful sales tactic when someone is panicking about the pricing. One, if you understand the amygdala hijack, you don't take it personally, right? You don't think like, I have killed myself to provide every possible benefit and opportunity to make this the best place ever. How dare you say it's too expensive, right? And there's a part of our brain that does go there, unfortunately. But once you know it's an amygdala hijack, you can almost more look at them like the child banging on the pots. And then you can do things like, you know, you remind me a little bit of someone I talked to last week who was really worried about whether her mom was going to get enough exercise because she had put her in one home where they said they were going to take everybody out and that they had a gym and that they would be doing lots of movement, but it wasn't true. And her mom actually, you know, her health declined because she wasn't getting enough exercise. So what happened with her is we signed her up with our trainer and she loved this trainer. And within 3 weeks, she actually was going to the gym every single day. And that daughter just called me last week and said she's never seen her mom in better shape or talking about going to the gym, which is something she didn't even do before she moved into the senior facility. So you see what I did there, Olivia?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
You painted that picture and future right.
So it's future pacing and redirecting, because when someone is panicking about pricing, it really just means that they're either having an amygdala hijack or they haven't fully understood the value yet. And going back at them with more and more benefits is not the way to go. That's what untrained salespeople do. An untrained salesperson, when they have someone saying, well, it seems very expensive, would say something like, well, we have a 4-star chef, and you know, it's expensive to hire good nurses these days, right? And they start hammering home on the benefits. That is not redirecting. That is getting down on the floor with the kid with the pots and saying, can you bang a little softer?
And I know from personal experience that doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
They keep on banging.
Exactly. Got to get out the crayons and the paper.
Well, great. Well, it looks like that covers our questions for today. Thank you, Julia, so much for, you know, sharing your experience and kind of going, you know, going deep on those questions. So we appreciate it.
I'm so passionate about helping women learn to sell better. It is such a key part of growing a business. And I wish I had sales training way earlier in my career cycle. When I built my first business, I was learning it all on the job and thought that just, passion and a lot of hard work was enough, but it is a skill. And so those of you who've had some sales training, I hope this complemented that. If you haven't had sales training, I encourage you to, go get some either with me or with someone else who resonates with you. And I'd love to stay in touch through, social media, or perhaps see you in my sales training program starting October 4th. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, just at Julia Pimsleur. Follow me and I will follow you back. And Olivia, thank you so much for inviting me here today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining and sharing with us, and for everyone attending. Thank you all for joining and participating with us. And we at Caring, we welcome your feedback on today's presentation. So and also if there are any topics that you'd like us to dive into in the future, we'd love to hear it. So there will be a survey that pops up as this webinar closes where you can let us know. And then you can also contact the phone number and emails listed here to get in touch with us. And if you'd like to stay on top of any upcoming trainings, I encourage you to visit our industry website, partners.caring.com, where you can also see an archive of our past webinars. So encourage you to explore those. But with that, we will all let you get back to the commendable work of helping seniors, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.